Hello students, welcome to this session on Reading Comprehension Basics. Now, what we will cover in this session are quite a few things. To start with, on your screen, these are the key objectives of this session. Now, we will introduce you to the reading comprehension part of your entrance exam prep. Now, we will see what exactly this reading comprehension is all about. How is it that questions are presented? What kind of questions are presented? How do we go about understanding a context? How do we go about understanding questions? How do we strategize our approach to reading? How do I strategize our approach to answering questions? Now, so what is this session primarily designed to help you on? Now, what exactly is this reading comprehension? And what is it that we as students need to keep in mind when we come across these kinds of questions in our exams, and how do we go about solving these questions? Now, in reading comprehension, what essentially you are given is a context which is an extract from either a larger text or it's written solely for the purpose of an exam. So what you're given is a context. A context can vary anywhere from, let's say, 175 to 200 words to up to 500, 550 words. So based on that particular context, you are given a set of questions. And you will have to actually answer those questions based on your understanding of the passage, of the context. Now, when you're given a passage of about almost 450, 500 words, and you have limited amount of time in the exam to be able to understand it and also answer questions, how do you go about strategizing your approach? So that's what this class will help you do. So this class is designed to help you read and summarize the text in your own words, because that's a very, very easy way to understand, comprehend, because it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's our understanding, and is our understanding an apt understanding of what the given context wants us to comprehend. So the best way to be able to do that would be to actually summarize the text in our own words, summarizing in the sense that when we are looking at, let's say, a set of 100 words extract from a 500 word passage, will we be able to understand these 100 words context, 100 words extract from the larger context in our own words in, let's say, about 15, 20 words or so. So can we give a 1 or a 2 sentence précis or a summary that encapsulates the crux of these 100 words or no? And if we are able to actually associate our crux of each of these different segments of a larger context, then we have successfully summarized the entire passage. So how do we go about doing that is what we will learn. Point number 2, answers questions. Now, there's a small point here that we've deliberately written here. The kind of questions that we're going to deal with in today's session may not necessarily represent the manner in which exams present questions to you to answer. Yet, this will give you an exposure to how do we understand a question, where do we look for, what do we look for, and where do we look for certain kinds of questions, is what we will understand in the second part. In the third part, we will get a first-hand experience of the various dimensions like length of the passage, the depth of the passage, the question types, so forth and so on of your larger context and questions. Now, take it for granted that because this is your first session on reading comprehension, take it for granted that we don't really expect you to be able to answer questions, but we will try to do them together. We will try to understand the context together. We will try to answer questions and strategize our approach towards answering these questions. Now, what are the certain elementary aspects that we need to keep in mind when we come to reading comprehension? Now, when we talk of reading comprehension, let's just simply call reading comprehension, for the sake of simplicity, let's just call it RC in short. So let's say when we are talking of RC, now we are talking of reading a context, comprehending it, and then answering questions. Now, it's very common among students of certain age groups that, we really don't have healthy reading habits. Now, given the background that, let's say, most of us don't have healthy reading habits would surely help do well in the exam. But now that we have just this much amount of time before we go to the exam, How do we go about strategizing our approach? Even in spite of not having healthy reading habits, are there methods that we can actually employ and strategize our approach into doing reading comprehension well? Now, so remember that there are two parts to it. One part is reading the context. The second part is comprehending the context. Now, when we talk of reading the context, when you're looking at a 450 word or a 500 word extract, a passage, let's call it, how do you go about reading it? How much of time do we have to spend on it? Now, remember that reading comprehension is usually a part of your English section of different exams. Now, the contexts that are presented to you are usually extracts taken from different fields of study. You could be looking at, let's say, a story that's given to you as a context and some questions asked based on the story. There could be personal anecdotal examples written as a personal essay that could be given as a context for you. So I'll just put them down. What could be the context for you? One, it could be a story that's given to you. Once upon a time kind of a story. These kinds of stories are usually easy to read and easy to comprehend, and the questions also are fairly easy for us to answer. You could also be given what we call as personal anecdotes, where somebody writes an essay based on their experience of something. That is one. And then you could be looking at essays which are taken from different walks of life or different fields of study. Let's say, for example, you could be looking at a science-based essay. You could be looking at, one is science, another one could be, let's say, on politics. That's another essay. It could be social sciences, not just politics. It could be social sciences, probably a geography-based essay. It could be biological sciences. So when you say science, it could be anything. It could be genetics, it could be biology, it could be anything per se. So it could be politics, it could be social sciences, it could be any context per se. Or it could just be a news item or a news article as such. Or these could also be extracts taken from certain articles from certain magazines where the writers are expressing their understanding of a particular or their analysis of a particular issue that is probably currently happening as such. So your context could be any of these, which means that sometimes your context could be easy to read and also easy to comprehend. Your context could also sometimes be not so easy to read, which means that not so easy to comprehend. So given that we are faced with these kinds of one or two challenges in reading and comprehending, how do we go about strategizing our approach towards reading, which will have a bearing on our easy comprehension of the context? All right. There's a small typo here, anecdotes. Now, these are the different kinds of contexts that we are looking at. The length of the passage, you can expect it to be, like I said, a very short passage, which is about 200 words, to a longer passage, which is about 450, 500 words or so. Now, if you look at some exams like HSE kind of exams, these exams are also known to give you contexts which are not just text-based kind of a thing, which are not just essays or stories or personal anecdotes. They are also, they are in fact certain poems. So they give you a poem and they give you questions based on that. Now, what we have to first acknowledge and be truthful to ourselves is this. We may not have a healthy reading habit. We may not like reading at all, leave alone comprehending. Yet, we have to acknowledge that reading comprehension is very much a reality. It's very much a part of your exams, which means that, and it's a considerable chunk of your exams, which means that the onus is on us to develop a liking for it in these next few months or weeks for that matter, and be able to strategize our approach and do our questions very well. Now, given these as the basics, let's just take a look at what usually are our challenges that we have as readers of different contexts. Now, the usual challenges that students face when we are reading are, let's say, one, I don't have a habit. So, a no habit is one challenge that we have. Then, because something we don't have a habit, or even if we want to read something, we find that a piece of text is not very interesting to read. So sometimes our reading context that is presented is boring. Sometimes we are not as fast in reading and comprehending as, let's say, what an exam would expect us to pace up with. So this is another challenge that we normally face. And then one or two other challenges students normally face is there is some kind of vocabulary that is used in passages or essays that is not very easy to understand, and hence that puts me off. So I face a challenge in understanding a particular word in a context, and that has a bearing on my understanding of the entire context. So normally, by and large, these are the challenges that students normally face when they come to reading and comprehending a context. Now, let's see how we address these challenges. We have to acknowledge where we are today, and we have to try bridging those gaps to ensure that we do very well in the exam. So, how do we address these particular challenges? Well, we don't have a habit of reading. At this juncture, we really don't have a choice. I'm not recommending that you develop a reading habit, read these books, read those novels, read these magazines, so forth and so on. At this juncture, that's not the advice we give you. So we're going to strategize our approach into reading and comprehending. So whether we have a good habit, which will help in the exam, even if we don't have a good reading habit, do not worry, this is no more a challenge for us. Well, contexts sometimes are boring. They're usually boring because we sometimes do not understand what exactly is the author trying to tell you. If an author has used 500 words in an essay to tell you something, we are somewhere lost in these 500 words in trying to find out or trying to understand what is the key point that he wants to convey to you. And because of that, reading a sentence after sentence, a paragraph after paragraph becomes boring, tedious to our eyes also. Now, we will strategize our approach in trying to filter out how to spot key points in a paragraph and how to understand a paragraph better. And we will understand key points in each paragraph separately, and we'll try to combine these pieces of understanding that we have with each of these paragraphs into a much more broader scale understanding to see what exactly is that the author wants to convey. Why did the author use so many words to convey just one or two key points? We will strategize our approach on that front, which means that even if a piece of writing is boring, do not worry, our approach will surely help you overcome that challenge of boredom. I'm a slow reader. Well, if you are a slow reader, what exactly would define slow reading? In other words, how many words, assuming that we are looking at a passage that has about 500 words, how much time would an average student take to read these 500 words? And how much time should he take to actually get the gist of it or comprehend the passage? Normally, you may come up with different kinds of answers. You may say, I'm going to take 10 minutes or I'm going to take 15 minutes. Some students may say, hey, I'll just take 5 minutes. So it varies from a student to a student. Now, what ideally should be the amount of time that we should be spending on reading and comprehending a passage? Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind here is we tend to be slow readers primarily because we are not able to filter the key takeaways in a particular paragraph of a passage. Because we think that every sentence, every word that is given in a passage, we have to read it very closely, and a big mistake that students make is also that they try to remember or memorize the different points in each of these paragraphs. That's one big mistake that students do. Do not make that mistake. Remember that you're not expected to remember any part of your passage at all. Your passage is there in the exam, on your exam sheet or on your computer screen, either way depending on which exam you're taking. So do not worry about memorizing different parts of a passage. Do not worry about memorizing nuances or minute finer details that are given in different segments of a passage. That is really not required. Then what is required? What is required is a key takeaway from one part of a passage. And just remember that the finer details pertaining to a particular key takeaway are in one particular part of a paragraph, and this is where the particular part of the paragraph is. What I mean to tell you is this. If let's say you have a passage with four different paragraphs, and let's say paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 contain some really key points. Now, when authors give you key points, they also tend to give you supporting points to their key points. Remember that. Don't spend a lot of time trying to memorize these supporting points. It's not required. That's exactly what I'm telling you. You should be focusing on the key points. Just to know that this is the key point number 1 in this particular paragraph, while this paragraph is just a broader introduction to what the author wants to tell you in the entire passage, while the first key point comes in paragraph 2, and these are the finer details that are in paragraph 2. They exist in paragraph 2. Don't worry about what those finer details are. Just focus on this point. Similarly, let's say there is a key point 2 in this particular paragraph, and there are some more other subordinate or finer details in paragraph 3. Don't worry about memorizing those finer details. Just know that the finer details associated with this particular key point exist in paragraph 3, so that reference understanding will help you when you actually come to answering questions. So this approach should actually eliminate our slow reading as a challenge. Then, I don't understand certain words that are used in a context. Now, does it mean that we'll now spend a lot of time developing vocabulary, spend a lot of time developing about 1,000 words that we have never really come across in this little time? The answer is a strict no. What you have to look at is this. In a context, when you come across a word in a sentence that we are not familiar with, try to make a broad sense of what the author is trying to tell you in that sentence. If that doesn't help you with just that one sentence, also look at what the author has said in the previous sentence and what the author says in the next sentence. So either that sentence alone as a broad understanding should give you some idea of what that particular word could mean, or that particular sentence where you come across the word which you are not familiar with, in combination with the previous sentence and a later sentence, should help you get an overall understanding of what the author wants to convey in that context. Never mind the exact meaning of that particular word. Which means that your fear of, I'm not very good at vocabulary and this becomes a challenge for me, is really also not much of a challenge when you actually strategize your approach to reading and comprehending your context exactly. Now, what we'll do now is we'll spend some time on actually understanding a couple more things. Now, to start with, let's say, how do you understand the flow of ideas in a reading comprehension passage? Now, remember that reading comprehension passage don't necessarily have to be designed or nor do they need to have a particular organization per se that you may have learnt in your school days. In your school days, probably in your 7th or 8th grade when you were practicing essay writing or so, we had a very, very fixed pattern of writing saying introduce in the first paragraph, then develop your essay in the second or the third paragraphs, and then make a conclusion in the final paragraph. That need not be the approach that the reading comprehension passages that are presented to you necessarily take. Which means that there are a couple of different ways in which authors may actually write essays, and there are a couple of different ways in which exams present these passages to you. Now, one method in which passages could be presented to you is where the main point, let's call it the main idea, because we're talking in terms of flow of ideas, where the main idea is presented to you at the beginning of the passage, and then from this, the support for that main idea is developed later. In other words, the author has made his point, announced his point, and then he goes about giving you details about why he thinks what he thinks. Alternatively, if this is one way in which authors write essays or passages, alternatively, you could be looking at the converse of it, where there are first supporting points or details given. Let's call them details. So first you're given details or supporting points, whatever be the case, from which the author will arrive at his main idea. It could be either of them. Now, there could also be another way, which could be sort of a combination of these two. In other words, the combination would be your main idea is somewhere hidden in between the passage, well sandwiched between your details, finer details in the passage. So it could be any of these combinations. Now, given that passages could take any of these shapes, remember fundamentally that your objective in reading and comprehending a passage should be focused on always identifying the main idea. This is what we will call as the what part of your passage. What does the author want to tell you? Why did he use 300 words? Why did he use 450 words to tell you one single point or probably a couple of points? So this should be your key takeaway, which means when you're reading a passage, your focus should always be on trying to actually spot the main idea. Now, the main idea in a passage could either be a piece of information or it could be an opinion that the author develops based on some information. It could be any of these things. So you need to pay close attention to what is it that the author wants to convey. In any of these presentations, this is your key takeaway. Remember where the finer details are. Remember in a very brief fashion how the author went about supporting his main idea. In other words, this is the combination of your passage. Remember that. This is your key takeaway. The minute details you just have to acknowledge. You just need to know what sort of details the author used to arrive at his main idea. So when you sort of strategize your reading and comprehending in this fashion, going back to the earlier example where we talked about a 500-word passage and how long should it take, now ideally, if you are looking for the main idea or if you are looking for the key takeaways in each of these paragraphs of a longer passage, you are essentially what we call as skimming and scanning the passage, which means you're really not reading it word by word. You're just trying to spot some keywords in sentences that will help you rationalize, that will help you come to a conclusion whether this particular sentence would be a supporting detail or would it be a key point. So if you start now skimming and scanning and you're able to spot some keywords in the passage, you will be able to filter supporting details from the key points. Now, for example, let's say the author in the second paragraph, the second sentence of the second paragraph uses a word like additionally, and then he writes a sentence which runs into, let's say, 20-25 words. Now, don't worry about this 20-25 word sentence. Your key takeaway from that part is the word additionally. The author would use a keyword called additionally only when he is adding on another detail to an already explicitly stated point, which means that most likely this is a supporting detail. So as long as you know that there is a supporting detail at this part of the paragraph, or the passage, you're just skimming and scanning through that, not spending a lot of time trying to really comprehend this particular point in the passage. So when you start reading your passage with this approach, you will be able to skim and scan and get a broad idea, a very quick broad idea of what is it that the author wants to convey. In these 500 words, I would say in about 3 minutes or so. So if let's say for these 500 words passage, you have 5 questions associated with it. How much time should we be taking in answering these 5 questions? Now, it would be very easy for me to say just take 30 seconds per question, but remember that how much time it would take to answer each of these questions would also depend on what kind of questions have been asked. That now brings us to this juncture of the session where we will try to understand what are the different types of questions, how do we understand these different types of questions, and how do we strategize our approach to solving certain kinds of questions. So let's look at types of questions. Now, when we talk of types of questions, let's say first and foremost, we could be looking at a very, very commonly tested question, which is the purpose of the passage, or what is the main idea of the passage. This is one question type. Then, other question type would be testing you on what we call as supporting details or supporting ideas. Now, in other words, a question could ask you, the author mentions all of the following, or the author mentions which of the following in support of his claim in the second paragraph. So that's a very, very specific detailed question, which is also pointing you, the student, to go and look for the answer in the second paragraph. So this is what we call as a supporting idea question. Now, these supporting idea questions can also take the shape of what we call as negative factual questions or except questions. In other words, what this means simply is this. A question could be written in either way. In one way, your question could be written as which of the following points is given in support of the claim made, which means there's only one answer obviously, or it could also be all of the following have been given in support of this except what. So look for which of these from among these answer options, which one would be the odd man out. So they could be framed either way. Then third most important question type would be inference questions. Now, inference questions again are of two different varieties, I would say. One, make an inference from a supporting detail. So, what do we understand from this particular point given in this particular paragraph? Or it could also be an inference that would want you to give your understanding of the entire passage. It could be either way. Now, these inference questions, how do you spot these questions and how do you understand that this is where I need to focus on, this is how I should strategize my understanding of the question, as well as looking for key takeaways, key points in your passage. When you're talking of purpose or main idea questions, take it for granted that these are the two keywords that are used in the question stem. Your question stem itself will say which of the following is the main idea of the passage, or the purpose of the author in writing the above passage is which among the following. So these keywords will be used in your question stem. Supporting idea questions, obviously, the term supporting idea may not be used, but the term supporting may be used. But you'll be able to spot that these are specific detailed questions when you just read the question, which is prompting you to look for certain specific details given in the passage. So among these three question types, take it for granted, this is the easiest of the lot. These question types are the easiest of the lot. which means that even if you come across a passage that is not so easy to read, that you think is dense, that you think is going to take quite some time in reading it and comprehending it, don't skip that entire set of questions as such. Don't do that mistake. Take a look at the questions. You have your entire question paper with you, either as a paper booklet or on the screen. You will be able to look at the set of questions for a reading comprehension passage. Take a look at them, see if there are supporting detailed questions. These are the ones that you should be able to crack, irrespective of your overall understanding of the passage. Then, when we come to inference kind of questions, in inference kind of questions, like I said, there are two different kinds. How do you understand that a particular question is asking me to infer something about the passage? Now, how different is this from these two? Remember that this is not our understanding of the context. The author has a purpose, we should be able to spot that purpose. Details are given, spot the details. Inferences, given that this is what is given to you, what can you additionally derive from the context? That's an inference. Which means that, remember that, inference questions are not about spotting micro details that are already specified in the passage. So this is one trap that exams use to confuse students. When they ask you an inference question, very likely one or two answer options will also have details that have already been mentioned in the passage. We read the passage, we understand them, we come to the question, an inference question, we look at a couple of answer options which match our understanding, which match our reading of the passage, and we think that's the answer. But pay close attention, for all you know, that could be something that has already been given in the passage, verbatim, or a rephrased version. They are never your answers for inference questions. So what is that you can derive additionally from the passage is an inference question. So how do you spot an inference question? One keyword that your question stem will carry is the word inference. It can also say imply. Your question stem also says something like the author suggests which of the following. So suggesting is an implication. What could this lead to? So typically pay close attention to these kinds of keywords in your question stem. You'll be able to understand what is it that you should do with that question. So broadly, these are the three question types. While there are other question types also that you may come across once a while, I will spend a little time on those question types also. Now remember that you don't have to worry about this terminology that I'm using in this session. Just understand what is it, how do you understand different question types? That's all. Don't worry about the terminology here. But of course, pay close attention to these keywords. Now, another question type could be that exams test you on, or what we would like to call as application questions. Now, what are these application questions? Now, these application questions are those that expect you to carry forward your understanding of the passage to a situation that is not given in the passage. Apply your understanding to a different situation and check whether that situation is apt for the understanding that the author wants you to have from the passage. That's exactly what these question types are. In other words, certain times your keywords in the question stem can be something like, what would the author of the passage agree with or disagree with? Now, the author of the passage may agree with something, disagree with something. Now, remember that this agree with, disagree with can also mean that they're inferences. But you will be able to know that this is an application kind of a question when you take a look at the answer options, not just stop at reading the question stem. So, if your answer choices give you situations that are not anywhere mentioned in the given passage, but something that you are expected to bring a correlation with the passage, those are application kinds of questions. But by and large, you will notice that these are the three question types that you will find in your exams. Now, moving on. Now I would say, just take a look at your handout that you have with you, and we will look at this passage. Remember that our first step towards reading and comprehending better is to be able to summarize the context of a particular passage. Now, what you have on your screen is one part of a passage, let's say one paragraph of a passage. Let's try to understand and let's try to summarize this. Read the following passage and write the summary. Now, we will read it together and we will try to understand how do we go about understanding each of these sentences, and we will also discuss which would be a key takeaway, which is a key sentence, which is not a key sentence. Now, how does the passage read? Kalari or Kalari Payattu of ancient India is the world's oldest martial art. Now, when you read a context of this sort, here's what will help you. Once you read this sentence, it introduces you to an ancient India's or the world's oldest martial art form, which belongs to ancient India. Now, once you read this, start anticipating what the rest of the paragraph or the passage could be about. Now, because the paragraph introduces Kalari or Kalari Payattu, as a rational reader, you should be able to anticipate that the rest of the passage is going to focus on this art form, which means that one thing that the passage could cover is describe this art form. Because he also talked about ancient India, so it could be about when could it be dated back to, why is this what could be the nuances of this martial art, what could be the description of this martial art, relevance of it today, so forth and so on. So we should be able to anticipate these once you read this. After you do that, now let's start quickly skimming and scanning or do some speed reading and see if that anticipation matches with what is given. Now, second sentence starts with an in fact. It is a mother of all martial arts in the world. So essentially, there's really nothing new or nothing that we would want to have as a key takeaway from the second sentence at all. It is more or less reiterating in a different way what the first sentence said. This art is said to has origin in Rishi Agastya and in Parashurama. So the origin of it. So is this now matching with our anticipation, what we anticipated earlier? Description of it, how old was it, how could it have developed, what are the different forms, relevance for today, so forth and so on. Let's see. So one point is origins of it. This is your key takeaway. Agastya is a great name in Ayurveda now. So there's another point. The main Indian medical system. Kalari means battlefield. So Kalari Payattu means practicing the arts of the battlefield. So what does it mean? The origin of the word and the meaning of the name. Students start with unarmed kicks and punches. Alright, so how is the training done? Then would graduate to sticks, swords and spears and daggers and finally study the marmas. So in other words, this is more like, our graduation from, let's say, secondary school to high school and high school to college. So it's as simple as that. So they've described 3 levels of gradation of how students learn. Now, what is this marmam? Marmam is a pressure point in the human body, and experienced practitioners can disable or kill their opponents by a mere touch at the opponent's marmam. So description of marmam. This technique, also known as marmakalai, is taught only to level-headed persons to prevent its misuse. So what would be the key takeaway from this passage if you have to summarize this long paragraph in, let's say, 20 words or 30 words? How do we do it? Look for key takeaways. One key takeaway is introduction of Kalari or Kalari Payattu. What was it? Then you move on to the origin. Then you move on to how students graduate. And the highest level that can be achieved in this is marmam. And why is it that marmum is taught only to level-headed people? Now, it is said that it is taught only to level-headed persons to prevent its misuse. So, it is taught to some people, and why is it taught only to some people? So, these are your key takeaways. So, you should be able to very quickly summarize all these points in a gist. So, it doesn't take us long. So, your next slide on your screen gives you some, let's say, some space for you to able to summarize the text that you have just read. Summarize the text you have just read in about 30 words or so. So, I will leave that summary part to you now that we have actually looked at some key takeaways. Let's take a look at a continuation paragraph of this. Now, the second paragraph says, ancient Buddhist monks who traveled from India to China to spread Buddhism are said to have taught these martial arts to the Chinese. So, your previous paragraph started off with that being the mother of all martial arts, that being the oldest one. Now, we are second paragraph with the first sentence is now giving you clues to anticipate what this could be. So, here we are now talking about how this actually spread to other parts of the world. So, Buddhist monks who traveled from India to China, they just didn't take Buddhism, they also took Kalaripayattu and taught the Chinese. For instance, is a keyword. If you ask me, I wouldn't really spend much time in reading this at all, because this is just a finer detail, a supporting point, an example per se, not a key takeaway for this paragraph. But for the sake of understanding it, let's just give it a quick reading. For instance, one Buddhist monk, Bodhidharma, was a Kalaripayattu master himself from his native Kanchipuram, yada yada yada. He went to China, to the court of Chinese Emperor Liang Nuti. He taught to the Buddhist monks. The Shaolin temple itself was founded by an Indian Dhyana master, Buddhabhadra. So, from here to here, for the instance till this monks, there's really nothing that we can call as a key takeaway. Here is one interesting point which actually tells us that the Shaolin temple itself was founded by an Indian. The Discovery Channel says, so, a point in support of probably what was spoken about, it's how it spread to the other world. Possibly the oldest martial art in the world, Kalaripayattu is still being practiced widely today. That's a key takeaway. In the Indian state of Kerala, Shaolin Chuan is said to have evolved from Kalaripayattu. So, what is your summary of this particular paragraph? The summary of this particular paragraph is fairly simple. How did it spread from India to, let's say, China? Though this paragraph did not really talk about, it spread to other parts of the world other than China, focusing only on China. So, how it spread to China by the Buddhist monks? Then, the Shaolin temple, the founding of the Shaolin temple being attributed to an Indian. And then, the last part that talks about its relevance today in India, and how different forms of Chinese martial arts are said to have evolved from Kalaripayattu as such. So, your next slide gives you some space for you to be able to summarize the text that you've just read in about 30 words. You have that space on the handout also. I would strongly recommend that you try to summarize things on your own. So, essentially, this is how you go about understanding reading comprehension context and speed read and comprehend things better. So, what we will do next is, we will take a look at a fairly longer passage, and we will take a look at also some questions associated with it and try to answer them. So, a quick recap of what we discussed so far. What we discussed are the testing points of reading comprehension. How do you go about understanding a context? How do you best summarize something? What are the different kinds of question types? How do you spot what is the testing point behind how a question stem is framed, so forth and so on. Now, what we will continue on is, we'll take a look at the actual exam model passages, though not necessarily, to start with for a couple of passages, though not necessarily the exam presentation of questions, but though the kind of questions that are asked are more or less the kind of testing points that your exams would test you on. So, let's take a look at this particular passage. We'll discuss the passage together, and then we'll take a look at the questions. Now it says of something like, afraid of being haunted by his dead wife's ghost, once a prisoner made an unusual request to the jail authorities to have his jail cell better lit. Alright, so this looks like it looks like a starting of a beginning of a story. Let's see how this unfolds. While many might regard this as pure paranoia, these are some who understand exactly what is experiencing. There are some who exactly understand what is experiencing. So, though the first sentence starts off like a backdrop of a story, the second sentence has got more to do with some kind of information or some kind of opinion the author is trying to give you. Saying, while many regard this as pure paranoia, there are some who understand exactly what this guy is experiencing. So, do ghosts really exist? While I certainly believe that there is a strong supernatural presence all around us, so here when you notice, while I certainly believe, it's the author now talking to the reader you. I feel it is a fear of anticipation which is more terrorizing. The feeling of what if I see a ghost is much scarier than actually coming face to face with one. So what's the key takeaway from the first paragraph? You'll understand that the first sentence is really no more important for us because this is just giving you a background behind what the author is trying to convey to us. So the author wants to convey from this first paragraph that, well, he believes that there is some kind of a supernatural presence, but it's got more to do with the fear. So what fear precedes what? What fear is more scarier than which fear? Second paragraph. 20 years ago, long before the Hollywood film The Sixth Sense created the whole I see dead people blitzkrieg, Pia Sinha knew she was different from the other 10-year-olds in her class. So now, the author is giving you an example of this kid called Pia Sinha, a 10-year-old kid who knew that she was different from the rest of her class. I was looked upon as a freak whenever I told people that I could see and even converse with ghosts. Even my parents wanted me to get professional help. Today, a lot of people, sometimes even doctors, come to me requesting me to conduct a seance so that they can get in touch with their dead ones. So now, in this context, you will notice that we come across a term which we are probably not familiar with. So, do we need to know the meaning of it, or can we make some sense out of it from the context? So, if you read the entire sentence, a lot of people, sometimes even doctors, come to me requesting me to conduct something so that they can get in touch with their dead ones. So essentially, you should be able to understand from the context that this word seance can be substituted with any other word which implies that, they want Pia to conduct some kind of a meeting or some kind of a ritual kind of a thing so that they can get in touch with their dead ones. So you should be able to make sense out of even unfamiliar words based on the context. It's strange how non-believers become believers when they want something. So now, here is a key takeaway from the paragraph. Why does the author say, it's strange how non-believers become believers when they want something? So here, probably the author is referring to even people like doctors who go to her for this kind of help. So these are the people who are perceived to be non-believers in these kinds of supernatural forces, but even they, when they want something personally, they become believers in supernatural presence per se. Let's continue our reading of this passage. Now, then our passage continues with the third paragraph. While the supernatural has its believers, many mental health experts debunk such claims. So this is a key sentence that would sort of give you a clue to anticipate what the rest of the paragraph is likely to develop into. So because it starts off with saying many mental health experts debunk such claims, your expectation should ideally be, what do they say? How do they debunk it? What's going on? What's the story behind it? So let's see if that anticipation matches with what's given. According to them, the reasons for such beliefs are varied, often detached from reality. So this is one reason why they debunk. Very often a trauma such as death of someone close can trigger off hallucinations and psychosis, which can be termed as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Such reactions abate after proper counseling and medication. Now, such reactions abate after counseling, medication. In case this word is unfamiliar to us, try to make sense of it from the entire context. The context is trying to give us understanding that there could be some trigger points in people's lives that could actually lead them into believing these kinds of things, or they could actually get into some kind of a hallucination or a post-traumatic stress disorder. So such reactions blank after proper counseling and medication. So what could this word mean? From the context, the word, because we are talking about mental health experts, this term should ideally mean these reactions would reduce after proper counseling and medication. Then, people who believe in the existence of ghosts and other supernatural elements are conditioned by the environment they live in. So this is one key point. What could be a reason why people believe in supernatural presence? It's the environment that conditions them. They externalize these beliefs. How does this happen? They externalize these beliefs by giving them a form and a shape. And then there are those who are ambivalent. Whether they believe in the existence of ghosts or not, they do not dispute others' claims. So two different kinds of people. Until a few hundred years ago, people believed that the earth was flat. But they were proven wrong. So why did the author give us this example? Now, you should be anticipating, or you should expect that the author has given this example of what a belief was once upon a time to how it was disproved or debunked at a later stage, probably through scientific research. Although I have never seen a ghost, I believe that the day may be very near when their existence will be confirmed. So this is why the author has actually used this first sentence as the comparison, so to say, that a belief can either be debunked, or in this case, this belief may actually turn out to be true. Or the belief that they don't exist could be disproven. You could look at that in either way. While the debate questioning supernatural beliefs and reasoning with the decidedly unreasonable continues, one question still remains unanswered. Is there something, or more importantly, someone out there? So this is how the passage ends. So if you have to sort of take the key takeaways from this passage, what would they be? Now, in the first two paragraphs, we understood how the author has sort of gave you introduction about how people believe. He's also given you an example of Pia, a 10-year-old child, and how even non-believers sort of tend to believe what they did not believe till then, until they felt a personal connection to something of that sort. And then these paragraphs talk about what mental experts perceive this whole supernatural claims as, and what do they do, and what are their observations on people who experience that after counseling and medication. And then finally, the last paragraph closes your passage with the author's opinions on why he thinks that though he has never seen a ghost, but he still believes that the day will come when it would be proven that they do exist. And he ends it on a note saying, is there someone or something, more importantly, someone out there? So let's take a look at the kind of questions that we could be looking at from this particular passage. All right. First question. Let's say question number 3. We looked at summary 1 and summary 2 for the previous passage. They were questions 1 and 2. So this is your question number 3. Mental health experts who do not believe in the existence of ghosts are not ambivalent. Now, where do we come across this part? In your passage here, in this part, the penultimate paragraph or the third paragraph, this is where we have. Then there are those who are ambivalent. Whether they believe in the existence of ghosts or not, they do not dispute those who believe in their existence. So this question says, mental health experts who do not believe in the existence of ghosts are not ambivalent. So this is a clear case of, yes, you can say that. This particular question will take a yes answer. Then the next question. Question number 4 on your screen. The prisoner mentioned in the passage probably believes that ghosts haunt only dark places. Now, the prisoner in the passage is the first part of your first paragraph, the first beginning of your passage. Let's see what that says. This particular part says that, afraid of being haunted by his dead wife's ghost, once a prisoner made an unusual request to the jail authorities. What was that? To have his jail cell better lit. So what was the question now? The prisoner mentioned in the passage probably believes that ghosts haunt only dark places. So the reason why that he said that he wanted his jail cell better lit is indicative of his belief that ghosts haunt dark places. So your answer to this question is a yes. Let's take a look at question number 5. Question number 5. According to mental health experts, ghosts exist only in people's imagination. Now, where does this part come? Now, if you take a look at the passage, when we talk of mental health experts, that was in the 3rd paragraph where we are talking of, while the supernatural has its believers, many mental health experts debunk such claims. According to them, the reasons for such beliefs are varied, often detached from reality. And then they go on. So here he says, people who believe in the existence of ghosts and other supernatural elements are conditioned by the environment they live in. They externalize these beliefs by giving them a form and a shape, which essentially means that, according to mental health experts, ghosts exist only in people's imagination. Would tell you that the answer to this question is yes, because that's all a doing of their mind, and they sort of try to externalize these beliefs by giving them a size and a shape. So the answer to this question also is a yes, it's correct. So going back to what we were discussing a little while earlier in terms of different question types. Now, in terms of different question types, ghosts exist in people's imagination is not something that is sort of mentioned verbatim in the passage. It is essentially something that we were able to derive from this part of the passage. So you can classify this question as an inference question. Let's take a look at question number 6. Question number 6 says, most people do not believe in the existence of ghosts. Now, one thing what we have to note here is this. In this passage here, now, there are people who believe, there are people who do not believe. Now, also the passage says that in the first part of the passage, whether people believe in the existence of ghosts or not, in this part, the 3rd paragraph of the passage, people who believe in the existence of ghosts and other supernatural elements are conditioned by the environment they live in. They externalize these beliefs by giving them a form and a shape. Then there are those who are ambivalent. So your question says, most people do not believe in the existence of ghosts. So the answer to this question also would be a yes, because there are some people who believe, but in this particular case, what you have to pay very close attention to is this: the kind of words that questions use or sometimes answer options use tend to sort of trick you into thinking the other way. Now look at this sentence, most people do not believe in the existence of ghosts. What is this word most doing in this particular sentence or the question? What difference would it make had it been people do not believe in the existence of ghosts? What would the difference be if we said some people do not believe in the existence of ghosts? Would your answer change? So you have to pay close attention to these kinds of keywords which are called as quantifiers. They tend to quantify something. So when you come across words such as something like all or many, more, most, often, always kinds of words, be a little cautious, because using these kinds of words in a context sort of tends to overstate a given context. Now, sometimes you can also have the opposite. We can say nobody believes in the existence of ghosts, which here essentially we are saying that this is exactly the opposite of, let's say, something that has been overstated. The opposites of these would be things that are understated. Something like few people believe in the existence of ghosts. How different would your answer be if we said few people rather than most people, or rather than some people or all people? How different would it be? So we have to pay close attention to these kinds of quantifiers when they are used in a context, either in a question or especially more importantly in answer choices, because they tend to trick you. if your context suggests or if your context gives you information that is supporting of either overstated language or understated language, go for them. Otherwise, if your information does not suggest something of that sort, then remember that a balancing act would be something like saying some people. So when our information doesn't suggest anything of this sort, I would say choose an answer option that moderates between overstatements and understatements. So here we are saying most people do not believe in the existence of ghosts. As opposed to if this word did not exist, people do not believe in the existence of ghosts, your answer would be entirely different now. Because people would mean all people. But as per the passage, there are some people who do believe in that. So remember that just this one word can make a difference to your output, or your answer primarily. Let's take a look at the next question, number 7. On your screen, question number 7, the word decidedly in the last paragraph implies that the society believes in the existence of ghosts. Now let's go to the last paragraph. Now if you were to look at this particular question and try to classify it as a question type, what would that be? One reference is, it is talking about the last paragraph, so you just have to go straight away to that particular point of your passage. So this is surely a specific detail related question. But let's also see if we need to make an inference based on a specific detail. A little while earlier, we did discuss that inference questions are two kinds. Either you could be expected to draw an inference from a specific detail or from the passage as a whole. Let's see what it is. The word decidedly implies what? Implies that, remember I said, is a key word for you to understand that this is now actually an inference question. So an inference question that is related to a specific part of your passage. So the word decidedly in the last paragraph implies that the society believes in the existence of ghosts. Is that a yes or a no? What do we infer? If you take a look at this last paragraph, this is where the context is. While the debate questioning supernatural beliefs and reasoning with the decidedly unreasonable continues, one question still remains unanswered. Is there someone or something out there? Debate questioning supernatural beliefs and reasoning with the decidedly unreasonable continues. So what is this decidedly unreasonable? The question says this word decidedly implies that the society believes in the existence of ghosts. So when you're talking of something that is decidedly unreasonable, the author is trying to imply that the unreasonable part is the belief in ghosts. So here, the word decidedly implies that the society believes in the existence of ghosts. So would that mean that the reasoning with the decidedly unreasonable continues? So would this mean that society believes in the existence of ghosts? Your answer is a straight no. Let's take a look at the next question. Question number 8. The author feels that a ghost may not be as scary as people believe it to be. Now, so if you take a look at the first paragraph now says that in this part. So do ghosts really exist? I certainly believe there is a strong supernatural presence all around us. I feel it's a fear of anticipation, which is more terrorizing. The feeling of what if I see a ghost is much scarier than actually coming face to face with one. So the question says the author feels that the ghost may not be as scary as people believe it to be. Well, your answer to this is now a yes, because we are able to infer from the last part that the feeling of what if I see a ghost, this is much scarier than actually coming face to face with a ghost. So this answer would be a yes. Question number 9. P.R. Sinha was the inspiration behind making of the movie The Sixth Sense. Now P.R. Sinha's reference, remember, we read is in your second paragraph. So let's just jump to the second paragraph. This is where we come across P.R. Sinha's context, where we are saying P.R. Sinha knew, when was that? 20 years ago, long before The Sixth Sense created the whole I see dead people blitzkrieg, which means that P.R. Sinha was the situation that the author talked about behind P.R. Sinha happened 20 years before The Sixth Sense was made. So here, the author doesn't really correlate these two. He doesn't say that P.R. Sinha's experience is a basis for the movie called The Sixth Sense. Nowhere does the author say that, nowhere does he imply that. He was only giving some kind of an analogy per se. So, P.R. Sinha was the inspiration behind the making of the movie Sixth Sense. Your answer would be a straight no. They were just two different situations which the author wanted to draw and bring our attention to. Question number 10. The society in which a person lives determines his or her belief in ghosts. Now, let's take a look at what the mental health experts think. That would be our clue to this particular question. That's in our third paragraph. Our third paragraph here talks about this part. People who believe in the existence of ghosts and other supernatural elements are conditioned by the environment they live in. So what is this question saying? The society in which a person lives determines his or her belief in ghosts. Your answer is a yes. So this is a pretty straightforward question which is not expecting you to draw any inferences per se. It is a perfect example of your supporting idea or specific detail question. Let's take a look at question number 11. Non-believers in ghosts respond well to counseling and medication. Now, let's again go back to that third paragraph where we talk about people responding to counseling and medication, that part of the passage where the author talks about those aspects. Now here, when in this third paragraph, from this context where we talk about such reactions reduce a bit after proper counseling and medication. Now remember that the reasons for such beliefs are varied, often detached from reality. And the author also says that very often it's a traumatic condition or traumatic situation, an experience of trauma that sort of, that sort of triggers hallucinations and psychosis per se. But these can be mitigated or reduced with counseling and medication. What does this say? Non-believers in ghosts respond well to counseling and medication. Your answer would be a yes. Let's take a look at the next question. Question number 12. Until now, there is no strong evidence to prove the existence of ghosts. There is no strong evidence to prove the existence of ghosts. Now, when we come to, let's say, when we read the entire passage and the last part of the paragraph, the penultimate sentence of the third paragraph, here, there are those people who are ambivalent, whether they believe in the existence of ghosts or not. They do not dispute somebody else's claims, probably because there's no proof to disprove the existence of ghosts. So until now, there's no strong evidence to prove the existence of the ghosts. So your answer is a clear yes for this question. Then let's go back to question number. Okay, so let's come to the next passage as such. Now, in this passage, this passage also pertains to a set of yes and no questions. Let's take a look at the passage first and then understand it, and then we'll go to answering the questions. This one. If you found yourself postponing or procrastinating important tasks over and over again, you're not alone. So nothing to really feel bad about if you're a procrastinator, but don't do that for your exams. In fact, many people procrastinate to some extent, but some are also seriously affected by procrastination, that it stops them from achieving success and disrupts their career. So what are the negative consequences of these, of procrastinating? In simple terms, you procrastinate when you postpone things that you should be focusing on right now. usually for doing something that is more easy and enjoyable. So some kind of a definition, so to say, about what procrastinating actually is. Second paragraph. Procrastination is a complex psychological behavior that affects everyone to some degree or another. So remember that the author has already overstated, generalized procrastination to everybody, no one's an exception. In some, it can be a minor problem, whereas in others, it causes stress and anxiety. Procrastination is not related to time management, as procrastinators often know exactly what they should be doing. So the fact that this is actually related to time management is a misconception. That's a key takeaway from this particular paragraph. The third paragraph. The procrastinator is often overconfident about his ability to complete a task on a tight deadline. So the third paragraph starts off with, what does a procrastinator think of himself or the task that he has at hand? Now, obviously, as per the author, they tend to be overconfident. He feels that everything is under control, therefore, there is no need to start. And then you have a specific detail as an example. Not much attention or time to be spent on this, but we'll just skim through it quickly. He may estimate that it will take only 5 days to complete a paper. He has 15 days. There's plenty of time and hence no need to start. Time passes and at some point, he crosses over an imaginary starting time and suddenly realizes that there isn't enough time. At this point, he starts working on the task and works hard and completes it. So this is just an elaboration of the fact that procrastinators think that everything is under control. All right. Now, what does the rest of your passage say? And later, after that happens, there is the erroneous feeling that I only work well under pressure. So normally, the author says that people who have this feeling of they work well under pressure is a misconception, because this is an erroneous feeling. Actually, at this point, the procrastinator is making progress only because he has no other choice. The timeline is almost coming to an end. That doesn't necessarily mean that people's perception that they work well under pressure is correct. So the author disagrees with that perception. The last part. Procrastinators work as many hours in the day as other people do. Okay, so this is an interesting point. And often work longer, but they work on the wrong tasks as they don't understand the difference between urgent tasks and important tasks. Apart from this, another common cause of procrastinators is feeling overwhelmed by the task. There's just way too much to do, and hence, I'm not really interested in starting it right now. A feeling of overwhelmingness. You may not know where to begin, or you may doubt whether you have the skills necessary to complete the task. So you seek comfort in doing other tasks that you find interesting, and know that you're capable of completing. So the key takeaways from this paragraph are, why do procrastinators procrastinate the way they do? That's about it. 2-3 different reasons discussed in this particular paragraph. How is the author closing? To get rid of procrastination, so now your anticipation is, now there are going to be suggestions that the author would make. You need to first realize that you are doing it. Acknowledge that you are procrastinating. Don't think that you're a good time manager. Then you need to identify the reason for it and take appropriate steps to overcome it. So this is what the author is suggesting. So this is, I would say, not as easy as one of the first passages that we discussed about summarizing the Kalari Patayu kind of passages, but at the same time, this is also not difficult for us to read and difficult to comprehend. So you will notice that the organization of the passage from one paragraph to the other paragraph is fairly crystal clear. We know what the author is doing in each of these paragraphs as he transitions from one to the other. Let's take a look at the questions now. Okay, so here also you have a set of yes or no questions. People who postpone tasks sometimes do not realize that they are procrastinators. Now, here is where the author actually talks about procrastinators spending as much time, but they really do not know that they are actually procrastinating? So the answer to this question is a clear yes. This is in this paragraph. They really do not know. At this point, he starts working on the task and all these things that I only work well under pressure. That the fact that the procrastinators do not know that they are actually procrastinating is actually correct. The answer is yes. Then you have 14th question, procrastinators are practically indolent. Now, to be able to answer this question, we need to know the meaning of indolent. So, what does this word indolent mean? Indolent simply means somebody is lazy. Procrastinators are practically lazy is what the question says. Is it a yes or a no? Now, in this particular paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, our first sentence says, these guys, procrastinators, work as many hours in the day as other people do and often work longer. That tells us that these guys are really not lazy at all. So, the answer to this question is a no. Then, 15th question, procrastinators generally avoid tasks because they are either boring or difficult. Now, needless to mention, the first part of your paragraph is where you have your clue. In the last part, in simple terms, you procrastinate when you postpone things that you should not be focusing on right now, usually for doing something that is more easy and enjoyable. So, that's your clue to say, these guys generally avoid tasks because they are either boring or difficult. So, they take up things that are enjoyable. So, the answer is yes. 16th question. Procrastinators do set themselves an imaginary time to begin a task. Now, we will find that the clue for this is somewhere over here in this particular paragraph, where he says that they are often overconfident. They think that everything is under control and there's really no need to actually start. And here is where your clue is. Time passes and at some point he crosses over an imaginary starting time. So he thinks that he's going to start this at some point of time in the future. So they do set themselves an imaginary time to begin a task. The answer is a clear yes. Let's take a look at the next question. Every person is a procrastinator. Well, the first part of the paragraph sort of says a couple of things. If you found yourself postponing or procrastinating important tasks over and over again, you're not alone is one clue. And then your second paragraph, the first part, procrastination is a complex psychological behavior that affects everyone to some extent. Is your clue to say that every person is a procrastinator? So your answer is a yes. Then the 18th question. Procrastinators do not enjoy a successful career. Now there is some mention of a career in the passage somewhere. In fact, in the first part of your passage, there is a mention of career. Now here, this part. In fact, many people who procrastinate to some extent, but some are so seriously affected by procrastination that it stops them from achieving success and it disrupts their life. So how many people get affected by procrastination? Pay close attention to quantifiers. Many people procrastinate to some extent, but some are so seriously affected. Not all those who procrastinate get affected. So pay close attention to quantifiers. What does it say? Procrastinators do not enjoy a successful career clearly is a no, because this is being very, very categorical about all procrastinators. Hence, the answer is a no. Then the 19th question. Confusion is one of the reasons for procrastination. Now, second paragraph, the last sentence. Procrastination is not related to time management, as procrastinators often know what exactly they should be doing. They do know what they should be doing. Then, the next paragraph, they feel that everything is under control, but only when the time comes do they realize that something is going wrong. In this penultimate paragraph, You may not know where to begin, or you may doubt whether you have the required skills to complete the task. These are your clues to say that confusion is one of the reasons for procrastination. Your answer is a yes. 20th one. Procrastinators are often overconfident. This answer also is a yes, because we did go over this particular point. Procrastinators start working on important tasks only in the last minute, also is a clear yes. That's also there in the penultimate paragraph. Procrastinators feel that they cannot work well under pressure. Now, if you look at this paragraph where the author says, the procrastinator is often overconfident about his ability to complete a task on a tight deadline. They feel overconfident and hence they don't start immediately. This says they feel that they cannot work well under pressure would now be incorrect. It is a no, because they are actually overconfident of meeting the deadline. Let's take a look at the next passage. Let's spend some time in understanding this passage before we move to answering the questions. Read the passage carefully, choose the best answer for questions that follow. This week's security scandal is the discovery that every household with Wi-Fi in this country has a network that isn't really private. Okay, it says this week's security scandal. So you probably will be able to understand and infer that this is probably some kind of a news item or an analysis of a recent happening on, let's say, cybersecurity, because we're talking about Wi-Fi not being really private. Then, for 13 years, a weakness has lurked in the supposedly secure way in which wireless networks carry out information. So how old is this misconception that we are secure? It goes as early as 13 years. Although the WPA2 security scheme was supposed to be mathematically proven to be uncrackable, this is a keyword. When you read something like although, you should expect a thought contrast. So the second part of your sentence will be a thought contrast to the first part. So it was supposed to be uncrackable. It turns out that the mechanism by which it can compensate for weak signals can be compromised. And when that happens, it might as well be unencrypted. Practically every router, every laptop, every mobile phone is now potentially exposed. Now look at the language that the author uses again. Every router, every laptop, every mobile phone is now potentially exposed. So the author does not mince his words in saying that almost every electronic gadget now is more or less at risk of going into the wrong hands. Second paragraph. It is not a catastrophic flaw. So when the author starts with something of this sort, and then there's a colon after that, you would expect an explanation as to why the author thinks this is not a catastrophic flaw. The attacker has to be within range of Wi-Fi they are attacking. So this is where the author feels that there is some element of a safe zone. Most email and chat guarded by end-to-end encryption is still protected from eavesdroppers. Since both ends of a Wi-Fi connection need to be brought up to date to be fixed, it is no longer safe to assume that any Wi-Fi connection is entirely private. Now, there are two sides to this particular paragraph. One, the author says that the hacker or the attacker of your private security or of your secure connection should be within your Wi-Fi range. So that is some kind of a silver lining is how the author sees it. But he also cautions us in saying that unless both the ends of your communication are up to date and fixed, don't assume that any Wi-Fi connection is entirely private. Then, the story is a reminder of just how much we all now rely on hidden mechanisms of software engineering in our everyday lives, and just how complex these complexities are. The fact that it took 13 years for this weakness to be found and publicized shows that no one entirely understands the systems and that we all now take for granted. So again here, look at how the author is sort of making categorical statements. No one entirely understands the system. Absolutely no mincing of words. Let's take a look at the continuation part of it. Okay. This is where we continue from the also part. Also this week, a flaw was discovered in one of the widely used chips that are supposed to produce a gigantic and completely random numbers which are needed to make strong encryption truly unbreakable. Imagine that. A flaw was discovered in one of those chips that are supposed to make things uncrackable. Even the antivirus systems that many users hope will protect them can be turned inside out. And then there are the known unknowns. Well, what does this mean? There are the known unknowns. We know that we don't know something. It is estimated that there will be 21 billion things connected to the internet by 2020, the end of this year. From baby monitors and door locks to cars and fridges, billions of these are unprotected and will remain that way. So the fact that they are unprotected and will remain that way is your known unknown. Then this paragraph. But this kind of technological failure should not blind us to the real dangers of the digital world. This is a technological failure. This should not blind us to the real dangers of this digital world. So what is your anticipation now about this paragraph? That the author would sort of focus on what these real dangers of the digital world actually are. Let's see. The information about ourselves that we freely give away on social media or on dating sites is far more comprehensive, far more potentially damaging than anything which could be picked up by a lurking Wi-Fi hacker. So this is where the author sees that the potential of the dangers of the digital world are far more intense than just having an unsecure connection, because we ourselves are putting up so much information in public domain. The leak of millions of user accounts from Equifax, the credit referencing agency, is only the most recent example of the plundering of personal information by criminals. Then, the last paragraph. Such hacks might not be regarded as the outcome of technical wizardry, but are dependent on human shortcomings in recognizing and fixing security flaws. Okay, so here's something that the author opines. He says that they are not to be understood as outcomes of technical wizardry, but they are dependent on human shortcomings in recognizing and fixing security flaws. Others would be impossible without tricking real users out of their passwords first. In criminal hands, social engineering beats software engineering. Wow, this is a very strong statement. Every time. It's not just once, it's again also overstated. And the problems of the internet cannot entirely be solved by the technical means alone. Until we design for human nature, no perfection of machinery can save us. So, if you look at the last two paragraphs, this paragraph, penultimate paragraph, talks about how we ourselves are really blind to the dangers we are putting ourselves to by putting up so much of information on the web as such. And then here he talks about criminals actually using social engineering and how software engineering as such is really no match to their social engineering, because that beats software engineering every single time. So essentially what the author wants to say is, what author wants to tell us from this paragraph is that criminals use social engineering to sort of bring out essential information from potential users and use that information against those users in cheating them. And it ends with a sentence that says, until we design for human nature, no perfection of machinery can save us. So what does this mean? Until we do something, no perfection of machinery can save us. So the author does not simply say, no perfection of machinery can save us. He puts a condition. He puts a condition saying, until we design for human nature, we are not safe. So when we do that, that's when we become safe. So it's sort of creating a condition upon how we can design the future for ourselves in the digital world. Let's take a look at the questions. <clears throat> 23rd question. It can be inferred from the passage that, now, this is the beginning of your actual exam model questions. Now, I'd like to make a point here that certain exams give you 4 answer options. Certain exams in a law entrance exam scenario and exams like LSAT, they sometimes tend to give 4 choices. They sometimes tend to give 5 choices. So we're going to look at all different kinds of variations apart from the actual question types and how do we go about answering these questions, what strategies do we employ in answering questions. Now, take it for granted that no matter what question you're given in reading comprehension, you will answer them only on the basis of what we call as process of elimination. What does that mean? That simply means that you will take a look at all the answer options and you will try to find faults with the answer choices. So once you try finding faults with answer choices and you start eliminating them, it's easier to narrow down to that one particular choice that is more or less faultless, or that is probably the least worst among the given lot. So either you make the best pick or sometimes the least worst. That's what we do. So now let's see how we can actually analyze answer options and gauge these answer options to actually eliminate them. 23. It can be inferred from the passage there. So it's a clear case of an inference question because you have that keyword inference in the question stem itself. It can be inferred from the passage. So let's take a look at the answer choices and see which ones we can eliminate. First one, information could be stolen from any device connected to Wi-Fi. Now, can we infer that information could be stolen from any device connected to Wi-Fi? Now, this is a very, very tempting answer choice because the author has also overstated things earlier. But remember that the author somewhere also says that you need to have both the ends of your connection up to date. Alright? If that is the case, then obviously it's not easy that data could be stolen. That's number one. Number two, attackers need to be in close proximity of Wi-Fi to be able to steal information. So here, just because something is connected to Wi-Fi doesn't make it vulnerable. So we eliminate answer choice 1, though it's a very tricky answer option. 2, only those devices that are not updated are unsafe from snoopers. Yes, of course. That's just what we discussed now. That's there in your paragraph 2. It is likely that eavesdroppers are interested in credit card and bank details only. So again, take a look at the kind of qualifying words and quantifying words that answer options use. We know that eavesdroppers are interested in your personal details, your credit card details and bank details. We can infer that from somewhere in the paragraph. But is this all that they are interested in? Not really. That cannot be inferable. We eliminate choice 3. Choice 4. We can infer that it took snoopers 13 years to crack WPS security system. Well, this is incorrect because we do know that from this part, we didn't know that a weakness existed in the Wi-Fi security system. That doesn't mean that snoopers took 13 years to crack this. So this is a distortion of the given data. We eliminate choice 4. So your best pick is answer option 2. Next question. What are the known unknowns referred to here? Now we have the known unknowns in the first part of one of the last paragraphs over here. And then there are the known unknowns. What are the known unknowns? The known unknowns are that by the end of 2020, billions of the things that are connected to the internet, we know that they are unprotected, will remain that way. So what are the known unknowns referred to here? Choice 1. The devices which most users do not even notice are connected to the internet. Yes, this makes complete sense. Choice 2. Things that people do not know. No, definitely not. If that were the case, the author would not have mentioned all this part in this paragraph. So we eliminate 2. Things that people take for granted. Well, again, that is a distortion of the given information. Baby monitors, door locks, cars and fridges connected to the internet. Now remember that the author does talk about baby monitors, door locks and cars and fridges. But remember that these are not the only ones. These are just examples. It is estimated that there will be so many billion things connected to the internet by 2020 from A to B kind of a thing. That doesn't mean that these are the only ones. So we eliminate 4. Your best pick is choice 1. 25th question. Which of the following is the meaning of social engineering as used in the passage? Social engineering was used in the last paragraph. Now, in the last paragraph, the author has used social engineering and he said that he's compared that, and he's also compared social engineering, saying that it beats software engineering every time. So what does this actually mean? Which of the following is the meaning of this? So this is a clear case of an inference question, because nowhere does the author define social engineering. He wants us to infer that. First one, revealing confidential information, definitely not, because the entire context is out of tricking real users out of their passwords. That's your clue. Efforts made to influence attitudes of people, this is again a distortion, because this is not about attitudes of people, not influencing that. Bringing about social changes is completely incorrect. We are not really looking at bringing social changes in this particular passage. An attack vector that relies on human interaction and involves tricking people into breaking into security procedures, yes, a perfect fit. So your answer to this question is answer option 4. Let's take a look at the next question. 26. Which of the following, according to the author, requires utmost protection? You have human weaknesses, personal data, security devices, all electronic devices. Now, the author is very clear in one of the paragraphs where he says that in this paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, he says that, but this kind of technological failure should not blind us to the real dangers of the digital world. And the real dangers of the digital world, this paragraph and this paragraph, when you look at the last 2 paragraphs put together, you know that the ultimate example, here the example is the most recent example of the plundering of personal information by criminals. So these 2 paragraphs put together will give us information that the author is more keen on protecting one's personal data than the other things. So your answer is choice number 2. The passage ends on a note of what? Let's take a look at the passage at the end of it. Now, if you look at this passage, there are a couple of observations that I would want you to make. The passage ending is where we have to focus on. So we know where to look for. It ends on a note of what? So, though this is a specific detailed question, it's actually wanting you to make an inference. Last part of the passage says, until we design for human nature, no perfection of machinery can save us. Optimism can be eliminated because this is not ending on an optimistic note at all. Optimistic note would be, don't worry about anything, we're all safe now, we are going to be safe tomorrow also. Pessimism is a very close option, but remember, pessimism would be the right option. This is only a trap here. You have to understand that pessimism would be the right option if the last part of the sentence did not have this conditional part. If the author simply ended in saying that no perfection of machinery can save us, then that would be completely pessimistic. But the author says that we can't achieve this until we achieve something. So somewhere the author is optimistic, somewhere the author is also pessimistic, in other words. But it is not just any of them. So it's got more to do with, we can save ourselves provided we do this, which eliminates 2 and gives us a clean sheet to option 3, which is ending it on a note of caution. Advice, of course, is also ruled out. The author is really not advising us. Let's take a look at this passage. As usual, we'll read it together, understand it, and then take a look at the questions. It is universally believed that with Greece, the East and Middle East were also birthplaces of scientific study. Universally believed. Along with Greece, the East and the Middle East were also birthplaces of scientific study. So don't give all credit only to the Greeks. However is a key word. Remember, a word like however is normally used when you want to bring in a thought contrast. However, it is also accepted that in the last 3 centuries, Western science developed certain features that enabled it to drive development in the Western world. Okay, now we are talking about things in the last century, how Western science has developed to drive scientific development in the Western world. So don't just restrict to these different geographies of the world. For at least since the last 3 centuries, give some credit to the West. What made the science of Europe distinctive from the 17th century onwards? Unprecedented in the West, unparalleled in the East. What was that? It was more complex than a mere alliance with confidence in the evidence of the senses. It was more than that. So what was it then? Quantification was important too. Indeed, as things have turned out, the marriage of science and mathematics now looks, from a 20th century perspective, to be a more enduring and influential feature of 17th century science, even than the revival of experimental habits. The mechanization of science and awareness of its applications to technical problems could persuasively be said to be decisive ingredients. What are they? Mechanization of science and awareness of its applications to the technical problems, which made Western science special, linking it to the precocious industrialization of some Western countries, and so to the brief military and economic hegemony they enjoyed in the world in the recent times. So this is a fairly short passage, just one paragraph, but this is by far probably the most dense passage by far that we've discussed so far. What exactly are the key takeaways from this? What is the thought flow of the author? Starts off with saying it's believed that scientific advances happened with the Greeks and the Middle Easterners. But don't just stop there, give some credit to the Western science for the last 3 centuries. Now, later, what makes it distinctive? What made the science of Europe distinctive from the 17th century onwards? So why are these last 300 years so crucial? Why are they? What was completely unprecedented, unparalleled till that point of time in the West? What was it? It was more complex than a mere alliance with confidence in the evidence of the senses. So what was it then? Quantification was one, and then the marriage of science and mathematics now looks to be more enduring. That's precisely why he says that. This is what makes this, over the last 300 years, so very special. Even this is influential in 17th century science, even than the revival of experimental habits. And then he talks about saying how these have moved on, and military and economic hegemony they enjoyed in the world in recent times, how these have actually helped them become, let's say, superpowers later. Let's take a look at the questions. Twenty-eighth question. According to the passage, the 17th century saw significant changes take place in scientific study in Europe. One of which was what? So what was one of the key changes that took place in scientific study in Europe? Let's take a look at the choices. Observe that you now have 5 different answer options for this question, not just 4, unlike what we've discussed thus far. First one, a synthesis of Western and Eastern thought would be a distortion of the given context, because the context very clearly says give some credit to the West, and this is exactly what they did. So it was not an amalgamation or a synthesis of both the different kinds of thoughts. An alliance between 2 prevalent schools of thought. What was the alliance? If you look at the context, the alliance that the author talks about is, or the marriage of science and mathematics. Now, an alliance between 2 prevalent schools of thoughts. Now, these are not 2 prevalent schools of thoughts per se. So this may be a very, very tempting answer choice for us to actually zero in on, but these are not two different schools of thoughts. These are just two different areas of study which sort of gave the impetus for scientific advancements. So we eliminate 2. Increased reliance on physical evidence. That's also to be eliminated. Affirmation of observation experimentation as methods of scientific study. Yes, that makes sense. Increased confidence in scientific theory alone did not really propel them to the heights that they've reached. So we eliminate 5. So your best pick for this question is choice number 4. 29th unit. 29th question. The use of numerical units of measurement to study and explain aspects of science is now considered. The use of numerical units of measurement to study and explain aspects of science is now considered what? Now, if you remember the passage, or if you take another quick look at the passage, remember that nowhere does the passage specifically talk about the use of numerical units of measurement to study as such. But the question is giving you some kind of an external example, and it wants you to apply your understanding of the passage to this external example and be able to combine your understanding and pick up the right answer choice. So what could this serve as an example with respect to the context? So this is what I was talking about earlier in the session as an example of an application kind of a question, where you are given a situation that doesn't exist in the context. It comes from out of the context. Yet you have to check for relevance now. Okay, the use of numerical units of measurement to study and explain aspects of science is now considered choice 1. A feature of 20th century scientific perspective. As long-lasting a feature of scientific study and observation. Now, this is where I would have a problem. We eliminate 2. We eliminate 1 also because it's a feature of 20th century scientific perspective would be incorrect because this is 300 years of research work. A scientific method more significant than empirical study. Yes, of course. That's where we were talking about the marriage between science and this thing. And something that is more advanced than just observation. Experimentation, that's what he was talking about. An unlikely coalescence would be incorrect. A vestigial feature from 17th century science, again, would be incorrect. Your best pick is answer option 3. Thirtieth question. According to the passage, the marriage of science and mathematics can be considered to have resulted in all of the following except what? Could have resulted can be considered to have resulted in everything except what? So this is what I was talking about as an except question. You could consider that the marriage could have resulted in everything except what? This is a typical case of an inference question. First one, the mechanization of science. Yes, of course, it surely resulted in that. Second choice, the applicability of science to areas of technology. Yes, that is given in the last part of the passage where he talks about technological and military hegemony. So it surely applied, it surely resulted in applicability of science to technology. Third one, persuading skeptics of the validity of the scientific method. Persuading the doubters of the validity of the scientific method is something that could not have been a result of it. So this is what makes it questionable. A period of dominance of the Western school of scientific thought. Yes, the passage ends on that note. So this is acceptable. Rapid industrialization. Yes, that is also acceptable because we're talking of economic and military hegemony. So 1, 2, 4 and 5 can be the results of that, while 3 would be the odd man out that could not have resulted in it. So your answer to this question is answer option 3. Let's take a look at the next passage. It starts off with saying, the capabilities that scientists have developed to engineer the genetics of plants and animals could have a profound impact. On what? The control of insects and insect-related diseases. Now this is talking about genetic engineering of plants and animals and how this could have an impact on insects and insect related diseases. So this is your context of the passage. One approach would be to introduce into the pest population individuals that have been genetically altered to carry genes that interfere with reproduction. So this is just one approach, one method. Researchers are also evaluating, that's your keyword again, one possible approach or a strategy to control insects and insect-related diseases. They are also evaluating possibility of replacing natural mosquito populations with populations that are unable to support normal parasite development. In addition, what else are they doing? Work is underway to produce mites and insects that are highly effective enemies of crop pests. For instance, is an example. You just want to quickly scan through it and forget it. A transgenic version of a mite is helping to control spider mites and almond orchids. There are, however, associated concerns. One is that arthropods, associated concerns, and what is one of those concerns? Arthropods, insects, in contrast to transgenic crops, have the ability to make the sudden changes in their diets and even in their genes, coupled with the fact that they can readily move from one area to another area. Furthermore, it may be that the foreign gene from the genetically engineered organism can be transferred to another arthropod species. So your first paragraph, needless to mention, this is a science-based essay or a passage. So the first paragraph is primarily focusing on what scientists have been doing, what kind of genetic engineering have they been doing on plants and animals to help control insects and insect-related diseases, and what are the different approaches they've been taking. That's the key part of this particular paragraph. The second paragraph, let's take a look at that. Second and third. Other researchers are directing their attention. So what are the other guys doing? To functional analysis of the genes that assure the virulence of various parasites. One of the most vicious malaria parasites, for example, protects itself by manufacturing a protein that expels drugs before they can be fully effective. Interesting, this part. Having identified and isolated these genes, scientists are attempting to develop a compound that will interfere with the action of the protein. This in turn should permit engineering the genes within the parasite to either prevent or reverse the resistance of these organisms to various drugs. So this essentially is focusing on how to counter what some of these parasites actually do. So some of these parasites are, what do they do as per this particular part? They protect themselves by manufacturing a protein that expels drugs even before they can be fully effective. So now that these scientists know that this is what these parasites do, they're trying to counter that whole process of manufacturing this protein itself so that the drug itself can be effective. How does the passage close? In related studies, genetic engineers have achieved impressive successes in designing agricultural plants with improved resistance to insects and viruses. So this is a good point. They've achieved impressive successes. Initially, such efforts were directed to improving plant resistance. Today, the aim has been expanded to include protecting the harvested crop. So not just the plants, but also the crop. In certain crops, cereal grains, beans and peas, weevils and other insects can cause losses during storage equal to those incurred during the growing season. So the last paragraph sort of ends on a positive note, saying that, well, there have been impressive advances made by scientists. They're not just focusing on, tackling insects during the time of plant growth, but also in trying to protect the harvested crop, because they know that there are certain parasites or insects that have the potential to cause damage to the harvested crop. Let's take a look at the questions. Why is it insufficient, according to the passage, to control plant damage or losses due to pests? Why is it insufficient according to the passage? Let's take a look at the last part of your paragraph, of your passage. Plants can resist pests, whereas harvested crops cannot. Well, why is it insufficient according to the passage to control plant damage or losses due to pests? Is it because plants can resist pests? Well, that's what makes this answer option incorrect. If plants could resist pests, what was the need for scientists to engineer all these things at all? So we eliminate one. Researchers have so far been on improving plant resistance only. How about that? Look at this word only. That's what makes this answer option incorrect. Choice 3. Damage to stored crops by pests is equally bad. That's exactly what the primary concern of the author is in the last paragraph. Plants are resistant to pesticides. Is it insufficient according to the passage to control plant damage? Well, this also is ruled out. The designing of agricultural plants with resistance to pests has not been very effective will be contradictory to the intent of the last paragraph. So your best pick, choice 3. Thirty-second question. Which of the following describes the organization of the passage? Now look at this question type. It's a very interesting question type that is actually asking you to understand what is the idea of flow from one paragraph to another paragraph. You'll have to take a look at all the answer options and see how the words in the choices differ from one another. A hypothesis is made. Okay, I probably will have a problem with the word hypothesis here because it's not just a theory. All through the passage, the author has clearly given and evaluated different kinds of methods and research procedures that the scientists have been implementing and developing. So it's not just a theory per se, an unfounded theory that the author is really talking about. And so we eliminate choice, choice 1. Second one. An observation is made and the different aspects are detailed to support it. Well, yes, this makes complete sense to us because that's how the passage also starts with. The capabilities, blah, 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 could have profound impact on control of insects and insect-related diseases. That's an observation. And different aspects are detailed to support that observation. How these could actually be having a profound impact has been discussed by various procedures mentioned. So 2 is totally fine. Choice 3. A specific case is presented, the pros and cons are discussed and a conclusion is arrived at. This is also incorrect. Nowhere does the author give you only one specific case. Nowhere does he evaluate it from the perspective of pluses and minuses. A generalization is made. Specific cases are provided to substantiate it. Again, this is also logically incorrect. Fifth one, a scientific discovery is announced and its implications are discussed. Now, this is a very, very close choice if you look at it. A scientific discovery is announced and its implications are discussed. Now, we could be okay with the first part that a scientific discovery is announced. What is a scientific discovery? That they have developed to engineer the genetics of plants and animals. The second part, its implications are discussed. Implications would mean if we implement this particular discovery or invention that we created in our labs, what would be the pluses and minuses? They would be implications. But the author does not talk about implications of the scientific research. He only talks about what are the different types of methods that researchers have been developing and what works where. So, though this is very a close choice in the first part, the second part makes it incorrect. So, your best pick is choice 2. Let's take a look at the 33rd question. Efforts towards producing mites and insects that are highly effective enemies of crop pests is a case of what? This is somewhere given over here as an example. Mites, where do we have it? Over here somewhere. In this part of your passage, we are saying, for instance, a transgenic version of a mite is helping to control spider mites in almond orchids. So, efforts towards producing these, blah, 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 blah. This is a case of what? First choice, a poison used as antidote to another poison. Well, that's a very tempting choice, but remember, if it's a poison by itself, if you look at mite as a poison against, let's say, spider mites, a transgenic version of a mite is helping to control spider mites in these orchids. A poison used as antidote to another poison. that would make it incorrect because it's all got to do with one mite being used, developed transgenic mite being developed to be used against another mite. Developing a population of harmless things to counter harmful ones. That's what makes it correct. Unlike the first one, where the first part used as antidote is not a poison. Killing damage-causing insects by insects of the same breed would again be incorrect. Using chemicals as pesticides is not what this is all about. It's in fact using insects against insects. Using the farmer's friends against the farmer's enemies. Again, this is sort of an overgeneralization and really blowing things out of proportion. So the best pick is answer option 2. 34. The use of transgenic versions is likely to be ineffective in arthropods because of all of the following abilities of arthropods except what? Now, where do we have this case of arthropods? Here, in this part of your context, where we are talking of arthropods. There are associated concerns. One is that arthropods, in contrast to transgenic crops, they have the ability to make sudden changes in their diets. So, is that given? So, this is a typical case of an except specific detail question. So, it doesn't require us to really think, just match it with the context and see what's there, what's not there. Ability to make changes in their diets, where do we have that? Alter their food habits is given. And even in their genes, transformation of genes is given. Coupled with the fact that they can readily move from one area to another, their migration is given. Furthermore, it may be that the foreign gene from the genetically engineered organism can be transferred to another arthropod species would mean that ability to transfer genes from the designed areas is given. So, what is not given is answer option 4. Resistance to insects and viruses is not given. That's your answer. 35th question. From the passage, which of the following can be said of a certain protein? First choice. It is helpful for the growth of parasites would be incorrect because when you're talking of growth of a certain protein, over here, the second paragraph is where we talk about that thing, the malaria parasite. For example, it protects itself by manufacturing a protein that expels drugs before they can be fully effective. So, which of the following can be said of that certain protein? First choice, it is helpful for the growth of parasites. It counters drugs against parasites is correct. It makes the malaria parasites more virulent again is wrong. It helps in the proliferation of disease-causing parasites is not stated nor can be inferred. It destroys plants' resistance to insects. It destroys plants' resistance to insects also is incorrect because we are only talking about this developing a resistance against, not to insects, but against chemicals. So, the best pick for this would be it counters drugs against parasites. Your second choice would be the answer to this question. So, that brings us to the end of this session. All the best.